The nature of deployment, the nature of that given branch's deployments. Um, Obviously, the Air Force is not known for its amazing hand-to-hand combat. No, no. Uh, a bit of anecdotal evidence I will point to when I was deployed in 2018. One thing I noticed that was just abnormal. It was different to observe, but the Army was doing PT every single morning, whereas the Air Force, we were just going to the defect to watch Sports Center. It was different. It's things like that, and obviously, not every deployment's equal. Certain locations, obviously, wisdom tells you the difference to discern difference between locations, between people, situations, decision making. And so, when you have a place like Afghanistan or Iraq, and you see in the news how we're in the process of withdrawing from certain given locations, you still must consider the fact that certain branches are overrepresented in certain places. And so, for example, the Air Force deploys a lot to the Middle East, and of course we're everywhere because air support, what have you, cargo planes, and delivering supplies and air support, all that, all that. But in terms of what you should be worried about in the most general sense, because again, I'm giving this perspective to the more generalized audience, not so much one specific career field or one specific person, but in the most general sense, wisdom applies to everyone. And so when it comes to making a decision such as that, if you look at the more generalized information available in terms of deployments, because a lot of information is not going to be available to you, and it shouldn't be available to you until you actually experience a deployment, because of the nature and the purpose of a deployment. So when you're thinking about when you might deploy one day, depending on your career field, the most general answer in terms of how your deployment will go, let's say more specifically to the Air Force recruits, if you join the Air Force and you deploy, in the most general sense, in the most general of cases, you will be deploying to do your job. So if you're finance, like myself, you will deploy to do finance. If you're not doing finance, you might be an augmentee to security forces. Who knows? But there are other cases where you might be an OCN, other country national augmentee, essentially, to security forces or the CE squadron. But essentially, you just watch other people work, contractors of the localized population. But things like that. You're not infantry first. That's one major difference between the Air Force and the Army and the Marines. We don't have infantry. We have security forces. And then, of course, we have special operations and certain other career fields like PJs and combat controllers and TACP. But we don't have infantry, so we are not rifle first. We do have to qualify. We do have to know how to shoot a gun. We have to qualify to deploy, and also in a lot of cases to go overseas. And then I believe it's like once a year. I'm not sure exactly the rate. It's been a minute since I qualified, and that was right before I PCS'd. But yeah, the Air Force, they are not handing you a gun first. They're handing you a pencil first. In a lot of cases, here's a pencil. Do some fancy stuff with it. So yeah, that's really number one. You really want to consider the nature of the deployment of that given branch. If you join the Marines, you should know what to expect. Stop looking at the commercials. Stop looking at the commercials. The commercials are dope. Very, talent, a ton of talent in regards to editing and putting out a certain message and a certain image of a Marine and who they are and what they embody and their mission statement. But you should actually talk to a Marine and talk to someone who's been deployed and who's actually served in that capacity for a certain amount of time. That's what you should look at in terms of, do I want that experience in terms of the deployment, or do I want the Navy experience of deployment where I could be in the bowels of a ship or a submarine? I could be on the water for months and stopping in different ports for a couple hours or 12 hours or a day or two. Just think about the nature of the deployment you want. Do you want air conditioned tent, or do you want to be practicing field exercises for 2 weeks? The Army has field training. I'm sure the Marines have it as well, where you go in the field and wherever that is, probably in the bush somewhere, and you do stuff. I've heard horror stories. My dad was he was infantry in the Army, and he always told me stories of how they would go in the field and there's no showers out there. Like, you're out there to do exercises, to train. So it's those things that you should consider and think about in terms of the lifestyle, the quality of life you want. A lot of people, they call us chair force because we sit in offices and cubicles and we drink our coffee and we live a certain lifestyle that's very comparable to the civilian lifestyle. Whatever. If you can get in, Essentially, and the main point that you want to think about in terms of the military as a whole, because it's essentially a job. But if you boil it down into a wisdom statement, you would say, I'm getting paid to solve a problem for this particular branch. So me, I'm finance. I'm getting paid to solve finance problems. And when I deploy, I'm getting paid in most cases to solve finance problems. I prefer that amount of predictability in my career field, especially in regards to a military branch.